Welcome everyone. This is another episode of HR Perspective. Today, our guest is Mr. Prasad Kurian. He is a senior HR professional with deep expertise in talent management and organization development. He has worked in multiple MNCs as well across industry sectors. Moreover, he's also the author of a recently published book, Life in Organizations: Paradoxes, Dilemmas, and Possibilities. Thank you so much for doing this with us, Mr. Kurian.
Thank you for inviting me.
Today's topic that we are going to speak about is performance and career management. So, beginning with performance management.
To me, the best and the biggest value add an HR professional can do in this particular context is to have a deep discussion in terms of precisely what is the performance management system expected to deliver.
Right.
Now, it sounds like a very trivial question, but I can guarantee you, based on my more than 20 years of experience, that this question often doesn't get enough discussion, and this leads to a lot of rework and avoidable human suffering in organizations. So the first thing is to have a deep discussion with the leadership team in terms of what the system should deliver. For example, is it primarily to set goals, monitor people on goals, and to evaluate them? Or is the purpose more to do with performance enablement or acceleration? Is there an expectation that there should be a link from the performance management system to the reward system? Or if an organization is relooking at an existing performance management system, precisely what are the problems that we are trying to solve through this rework? Now, once we have that discussion and we have clarity, then an HR professional can look at the best practices in the field and also his or her expertise and come up with various design options along with the trade-offs of those options. And then a meaningful discussion can happen that can lead to an informed decision on what precisely should be the new configuration that will help the organization to meet the objectives that it has outlined. So to me, effectiveness is always defined vis-a-vis the objectives. So depending upon what was the stated objectives of the performance management system, the effectiveness measures can be outlined. For example, typically in an organization, performance management system is a tool to accomplish something. For example, it could be a great tool in terms of cascading organization level objectives to individual level objectives. So from that perspective, to what extent that cascade happens in a smooth manner, that becomes one factor of effectiveness. Similarly, having a clear link between individual performance and organizational performance is another key enabler. In some organizations, there's also deeper significance. Say, for example, we want to build a high performance work system. Then you go beyond the mechanics of this into the assumptions that underlie the performance management process itself. So to summarize, effectiveness has to be defined vis-a-vis the objectives. And the fundamental thing is that the performance management system should make a meaningful contribution to the business strategy. Then only it has a right to exist. So in one of my organizations, what we did was we first created business scorecards. For example, this organization had 7 business units. So the first thing that we did was to work with the heads of those business units and agree on a scorecard that will measure how well each of those business units are doing. And we came up with a system along with finance and other functions so that there can be a real-time indication in terms of how each of the business units are doing at any particular point of time vis-a-vis those scorecard parameters. So the idea was that whenever some activity of performance management happens, say for example, goal setting happens, it has to be seen in the context of the business unit performance. Similarly, monitoring of performance happens, it also has to be seen in the context of the larger unit performance. And the same thing holds good for evaluation. Now, the tremendous advantage of this is that typically, if you've handled processes like this in an organization, HR or top management often gets blamed by saying that, okay, we came with a particular distribution in our business unit, then either HR or top management changed it arbitrarily. Now, the advantage of the system was that what I used to do was, one, of course, I ensured that all individual performance discussions happen in the context of the business performance. So that acts as a one reality check. Secondly, once we have the distributions from the various business units, all I need to do is to get all the business heads into the same call, project their relative performance vis-a-vis the business scorecard, and also show their rating distributions. Then I can just tell them that, okay, now you can see all the data. How well have you done as a business? And this is how your rating distribution looks like. Now you are senior leaders, you have the data, you calibrate. Of course, it took a few iterations, but it worked. So the beauty of this was that there's a much higher ownership of the business leaders in terms of what was the final output of the performance management system, rather than it being attributed to some external force like corporate HR or business leaders or something like that.
Right.
The other thing that we did, again in the same context, was that we tried to align the performance management to the deeper philosophical convictions of the organization. For example, this organization used to believe that the how of the performance is as important as the what of the performance. So then we ensured that the performance management system gives 50% weightage to the what, which is your achievement vis-a-vis your goals, and 50% to the how part. Now, how part had multiple components. For example, the firm had a set of behaviors that each employee was supposed to exhibit. So there was a 360-degree feedback that was used to evaluate that aspect. There was skill building on both behavioral as well as functional skills. And this in turn was linked very seamlessly to the career management process as well as the learning and development process. So this deeper alignment to the organization philosophy and smooth integration with other HR systems is the second one I wanted to highlight as a best practice that I've been personally involved in. The first thing is to have a clear understanding. To me, underperformance is if you don't meet your targets, you're underperforming.
Right.
Now, if you're underperforming without a sufficient reason, then it's poor performance. So the first thing is to make a clear distinction between this. And then wherever this happens, look at the factors that might have been beyond the control of the individual. Because typically goals come from a business planning process, and that's made under certain assumptions. While we need to maintain the sanctity of the business planning process, we also should not penalize people if there were factors that were outside their reasonable control that led to underperformance. So that's the first aspect. Secondly, philosophically speaking, you should always fix poor performance and not poor performers, because it's very easy to get rid of people. But if you help the people to come out of the poor performance by providing them additional support, it not only builds trust, it also increases the performance of the organization. There is a deep psychological factor that makes these discussions difficult or even unpleasant. So it's very interesting. It's called superiority illusion. So what happens is that take any group of people and ask them to rate themselves vis-a-vis the other members of the group. You'll find that about 75 to 90% of the group of 75 to 90% of the people in the group will rate themselves above the median, which is obviously mathematically impossible. So if you look at a typical performance management system, it has a 5-point rating. Typically 4 and 5 are the positively differentiated ratings, which typically goes to around 25% of the people. So if 75% of the people think they're above average, but only 25% actually get it, then mathematically 50% of the people will be dissatisfied. And this cannot be wished away because it's a human nature. But having said this, a lot of things can be done. For example, if an employee gets real-time feedback in terms of where do I stand vis-a-vis my goals, that definitely helps, because a lot of the unpleasantness comes because the underperformance gets told to the employee last minute, and hence it comes as an unpleasant surprise. Similarly, often a lot of unpleasantness happens because the employee and the manager don't have a shared understanding of precisely what good looks like. So
True.
by working on these factors, the basic unpleasantness can be reduced, but it cannot be eliminated. It's like saying that when you have a viral infection, sometimes you are prescribed antibiotics. No, antibiotics only work on bacteria, not on virus, but they can actually help in terms of preventing secondary infections. So it can be addressed, not eliminated. The important and relevant data is anything that can enable the organization and the employee to take action. Say, for example, a performance rating at the end of the year is good for a post-mortem analysis, but not for improving performance. So the data that is relevant is job performance data, typically captured through scorecards, that's available in real time or close to real time, so that organizations can spot potential areas of trouble and take action immediately, so that the underperformance is addressed promptly. So any real-time data is what I would say is critical data. The fundamental reason that prompted me to write this book was that, see, I started as an engineer. So I was working with ISRO before I went to XLRI for my HR education. So in engineering, you have a problem and you solve it. Whereas once I got into the rather fussy domain of management and human resource management in particular, I found that many of the problems that we face are not problems in the normal sense, in the mathematical sense. These are more paradoxes. Now, a paradox occurs when there are multiple opinions about something, each of which is true, but they seem to be in conflict with one another. So that way, problem solving becomes much more of a delicate balancing of the conflicting pulls and pressures acting on that moment, as compared to arriving at one right answer through an algorithmic process. So I sort of reflected my career experience over the last 20 years. And then if you look at the book, it sort of starts with the entering the organization, to performance, to learning, and then finally about leaving the organization. It sort of looks at what are the paradoxes and what are the ways to respond to those paradoxes in a manner that can improve both organizational effectiveness as well as personal happiness. So that was the rationale behind my book. To me, if I have to pick one skill, I would actually say a deep understanding of one's context. Because at the end of the day, value is always defined by the customer. It's an internal customer as far as HR is concerned. So if you understand your context or the organization deeply, then you can bring in your expertise in terms of behavioral science, and then also a high level of self-awareness to create differentiated value. So to me, a keen understanding of the context coupled with a deep understanding of one's craft and oneself is what can help a person to create differentiated value.